A quick note before we begin. This podcast dives into real, often raw conversations about life's most profound moments, from a labor's beginning to life's end and all the complexity in between. Some stories may be emotionally challenging or deeply moving. Please listen with care and know that you are not alone. Welcome to the Mamatoosa podcast. I'm your host, Atoosa Benji. Hello, and welcome to the Mamatoosa podcast. It's my honor and my privilege to have Veronica here with us today. And I'm especially grateful that you agreed to come on as my guest today because some of the topics we're going to hit are so profoundly deep, heavy, important, sacred, secret, in some places even taboo, and often not talked about. And I think most of my listeners know now that the intention of the Mamatoosa podcast is to bring light to amazing stories. So the conversations that you have with me as a midwife through the beginning of life, through the journey of life to the end of life, include some pretty amazing stories from women who, and people are, could be the person behind you in a traffic jam, the woman in front of you getting a coffee, the person who you just helped have a baby, or the person who you're helping across the street. We're all such a wealth of experience, lived experience in this lifetime on this realm. And my intention is really to hold space for those stories, bring light to the stories in an effort to open it up for conversation and bring light where there is darkness and bring clarity where there are shadows. Because so much we have to hold. Some of us choose to hold because we feel safer that way. And some of us choose to share. And for those who choose to share, I'm honored to have you on. And I cannot wait to hear your story and to go through it with you. So welcome, Veronica.
Thank you, Atoosa. I couldn't feel safer with anyone else. So I'm happy to be here.
Thank you for taking the time. It's really my honor. Tell me a little bit about your early years.
Early years. I mean, ostensibly all was well. Everything's fine. Grew up as the third of 3 children, a baby, in a sort of not so far from immigrant, experience. My parents were the first in their family to go to college. In one case, the only. There was a sense of striving and betterment that was really aggressive. And I'm really grateful to my parents for that. We ended up in a part of the United States that was possibly, I believe at the time, it was considered like the wealthiest part of the United States. And so keeping up with those Joneses no one was trying to fake it, I'll say, but they were trying to acquire and sort of relax into it. I never felt the relaxation part. We had a home that my parents built when I was a young child, and half of it sat undecorated for years because there simply wasn't money to decorate it. And friends of my older siblings would come over and say, "Why is half your house empty?" And it was like embarrassing. We didn't really know. We knew we shouldn't say we don't have the money for it. My father was a prominent person in town, well respected, and that put a lot of light on us as his children to not mar the reputation, really, because it could have had a really deleterious effect on his ability to make money. But, I never wanted for food. I never wanted for clothes. I mean, I felt kind of ripped off as the youngest to be wearing all the hand-me-downs of both genders above me. But, such is life. I could have been in a lot worse straits, to be sure. We were healthy. We had enough, but there wasn't a sense of happiness in the house. I think because that striving was sort of always tugging at the back of certainly my dad's mind. I don't know how clued in my mom was to finances and those kinds of decisions. pretty typical labor mom cooking meals and taking care of kids, and dad coming home kind of grumpy and,
very
where's
delineated
dinner?
roles.
Yeah, very much delineated. So I just didn't see there wasn't a lot of money for extra. There wasn't a lot of money for joy. It's funny, people ask me about, oh, did you ever see thus and such movie? And I'm thought, no, we never went to the movies. Like, we just didn't do that. There wasn't, I don't know what it was about. I presume it was about, we didn't have the money for that, for 5 people to go to the movies, We would go out for a pizza on Friday night, and that was kind of it.
Mm-hmm. And isn't it interesting that children seem to pick up on the unspoken? It doesn't even really necessarily have to be said, but it's been my experience from myself and from all the people with whom I speak that children pick up these clues and then piece a story together, sometimes accurately, sometimes not so accurately. But very little actually has to be said for a child to be like, the insides and the outsides don't match, and I feel it.
You've described my childhood probably up until adulthood just perfectly there, because while we noticed, I certainly was very observant, and I had the luxury of 2 older siblings to watch sort of make missteps and get caught or not get caught or beg me to hold a secret, or, it was very much each man for his own. And that wasn't even necessarily against united parents. And again, by all accounts, external accounts, they appeared very much a united pair, but there was a lot of just silence, no one was honest. No one was, or if they were honest, they were losing it, right? They were snapping and finally saying the thing that was probably overkill.
Right. It was over the edge.
It was too much.
They had tipped.
There was no sort of micro valve release happening along the way to make things, to keep the pot from boiling over.
Right. Right. So when the temperature was up, it was up. It was explosive.
Yeah.
Tell me about your middle school and high school years.
As the youngest, I was very fortunate. I think my parents kind of took their eyes off the last child in a way, and also maybe my personality. I was very, let's say, competent and conscientious.
Capable,
sure. I, always had good grades. I essentially never got in trouble. I was the kid getting the lead in the play at 2nd grade and on, or my mom joked that she could bounce a quarter on my bed when I was like 3 or 4. And that didn't alarm anyone. They thought that was just dandy. So I was pretty tightly wound, and I kept it tight, and I kept it tight around them. And I learned, particularly in those years, probably from like 5th grade on, honestly, so 10 years old, I would say I learned to really separate my at-home personality from my out-in-the-world personality. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, to modulate at school, those folks still have access to my parents. So you can't go totally off the rails there, but you can be a little more honest or loud or whatever. I mean, my dad said to me one time, "You were so sweet. You were such a sweet little girl. And then you went to school." And like that cuts me still to my core,
Mm-hmm. You changed.
He told me that as an adult. Like what I heard, I don't know if that's what he meant, but what I heard was, "And you disappointed me. You became a little shit, a little brat, spoiled brat. And that's who you've been ever since in my eyes." Some of that is obviously going to be me and my perception, because I didn't drill down, but neither did he. I mean, he's the adult in the situation. Anyway, that's water under the bridge. But these are the kinds of exchanges that we were having even until very close to when he passed away, about 5 years ago.
So from those formative years on,
I learned to lie and hide and obfuscate and sort of, what's that phrase? Ask for forgiveness rather than permission. Like if I get caught, then I'll ask for forgiveness. Right. But I'm certainly not going to ask you, can I go to this party? Because I know you're going to say no.
Right.
And I don't want to hear that.
Right.
So it was my way of fighting back.
And you also had older siblings who you said that you were never hungry. There was never a want for your basic needs to be met. And you had two siblings who had very different experiences in the way that they were treated around food at the table and body image.
Yes, we had, I would say what we lacked in sort of material goods and furniture, certainly for some of our life, we had in spades in food. Food was the language of abundance in our house. So my mom would cook every single night, except for one night a week, basically. You know, we were served 2 and 3. She cooked enough for 2 and 3 servings of everything, including, you know, so we had a lot of healthy food. We just had a lot of volume, and we're a tall family. And so everyone was growing all the time, like really growing. And I always joke that I was seated between my brother and my dad, and I kind of ate with my arm around my plate as though I were in prison or something, you know, protecting my food. And so I ate so fast. That said, my brother was a little string bean of a guy. He's tall and everything now, but my sister, they're closer in age. She was, seems typical between boys and girls, she was much bigger than he was before, you know, where he was at that same age.
Right.
And she was heavy. And I watched her get given different kinds of food for her lunches than my brother and I, who are both slim. Sort of looks askance at, like, really, do you need to have another such and such of that,
right,
you know, where the rest
another
of us
bowl,
are just
yeah,
gung ho, like a bunch of rabid animals. And in fact, not only that, but there were times where we would go out there in sort of later days. Then there was a steakhouse that we could go to once in a blue moon for, I don't know, a holiday or something. And they had a salad bar. And to know me is to know that I'm essentially like half rabbit when it comes to salad and vegetables and stuff. And they had a salad bar. And I remember there was one time, it was very normal for me to have a salad piled super duper high. I was probably like 6, and such a size of a plate where people passing by stopped at the table and said, is she really going to eat that? Kind of an amusement. And my parents very proudly said, you better believe it. Of course she will. And then she'll have her steak and potato and dessert. And I did, you know?
Right. And there was no judgment about it. There was
actual pride. Like, watch her go. And she's skinny, right? I think, right, if it had been on my sister, it would have been grafted in another they would have been saying, you shouldn't, why are you eating all that? You know?
And so early on, there was already this, I'm kind of getting away with something that my sister isn't.
Right. And yes, 100%. And it was sort of underpinned our entire relationship. Oh, she was 4 years ahead of me and miserable and overweight and having acne and, you know, so if I'm 12, she's 16, you know, that's a can be such a terrible time for people. And that was her experience, you know. She did not have a great experience. Whereas in high school and middle school and whatever, elementary, I was sort of very able to seamlessly move between different groups of people. I was always, when I graduated high school, I got an award for being the glue of my class.
Wow.
Now, granted, it was only 23 people, so not that much glue, but still, you know.
Still glue.
And I like people, you know, it's easy for me to do that, but I think it was part of the skill set that I developed in, like, being different people around my family and right. Not that I was being disingenuous with people, but I could just really,
you had a skill.
I could just sort of like shapeshift a little bit.
Yeah. You had acquired that skill, that malleability for survival.
Yeah. And I would like to believe, which I haven't thought about until right now, that maybe it was some allowing myself not to judge them and to just say, like, oh, these people, other people think you're kind of this, you know, class ding dong, but I'm going to talk to you and I'm going to treat you with dignity and whatever, because I felt I watched people get cut down a lot in my family, you know, lots and lots of judgment, heavy Catholicism, you know, again, having sort of this town-facing prominent parent whose job is reliant on that reputation being really squeaky clean. You know, my mother has a disease that was neither of my parents would ever talk about their medical stuff, even with like other doctors practically. It
wasn't talked about.
There's a lot of denial, just flat out. Like, I guess that's what the kids call gaslighting, right? Because I can see that you're walking with a limp. Alas, you say, there's nothing wrong.
Which is interesting because in obviously you and I are from different cultures. Viewers, we're from very different cultures, religions, countries. And while we're both immigrants, I think there's a certain wiring of the immigrant system, which is settle in, make not too much noise, and live your life sort of under the radar with the facade that we're doing just fine, that we're doing great. Actually, we're doing great. And so intertwined in that is you almost have to say, what limp? What empty refrigerator? What? No, that's not happening because you have to keep up the facade for pure survival, whether that is a sense of security that is made up or real in terms of your actual physical safety of your family, which epigenetically, I think we all carry, especially as immigrants. But the realization that most families carry these undercurrents of secrets and facades to keep everybody safe, because at some point it didn't feel safe. And so they had to create that structure. Tell me what happened as you moved into high school and your body image and what continued to happen with food and body and sexuality, I'm assuming, as we're developing and changing in puberty and all of that.
Yes, for sure. There was sort of the way I would eat quickly morphed. I started smoking at age 12 because I had an older sister who started smoking at 16, You're
on the fast track.
I was just, I was grandfathered in or whatever, right? And then I started drinking at sleepovers, at friends' houses where my parents again did not drink at all. Maybe a little bit here and there at Christmas or something, but never with dinner, or certainly never a cocktail after work, that kind of thing. So, you tell me I can't do something, obviously I'm going to go do it. And I don't appear to have an off button, not with food, not with alcohol, not with cigarettes, And so it became more of that, again, like kind of a double life, right? And as soon as I could get out of the house, in great contrast to my experience with my own kids today, I was like, get me out of here. I'm out of here. Like, I just want to
be free,
get out so I can be myself, not be under the watch of the overlords,
overbearing people. Yeah.
And, for me, boys became of interest. Hormones kicked in. And I remember sophomore year, I was invited by a senior to a prom. I didn't know him really. I mean, our school wasn't that big, but he was essentially a stranger to me. And so I went, and there was one other sophomore girl there, and she and I got so drunk. I mean, we were both getting sick. And then later I woke up in the middle of a field with somebody who was not even my date in my skirt, in my dress, like up my dress. And to be honest, it wasn't until probably 5 years ago when a male friend from that era said, I saw thus and such person this past weekend and I wanted to like punch him in the face. And I said, why? And he said, because of what he did to you. And I was like, what? And he said, that was assault. So I, all these years, just felt like a cheap slut, basically, right? Because I drank and I got myself, quote, into this situation. Now, part of me has some healed part of me has some empathy for the dumb teenage boy that also probably, I mean, it's not an excuse. I'm never going to excuse it, but I know people are human and they make mistakes. But I hate that I carried that as my fault and my shame and my responsibility. And of course, it being tied to having, I don't know that if I had been stone cold sober, I would have told my parents, but certainly being drunk, there was no way I was going to tell them. And to be honest, no one ever talked to me about dating, kissing, none of it. When you're Catholic, you just simply get the message. No one even said to us, my 6 years older than I brother, and I still laugh, like we're still waiting to be told the birds and the bees. You go straight up nothing. And so to have done anything was to be besmirched, So I didn't dare. I just didn't dare. And my sister my brother had gone to an all boys school, so he didn't really have the whole dating kind of normal high school experience either, let's say. And my sister didn't because she was heavy and, she just was in a small school and there just weren't those opportunities or whatever. So that's where I was really on my own. I had no guidance behind them. And so from that moment, I was like, I'm never drinking again. So I go to an extreme. So I don't drink again until college.
And the message that you had was, if I tell, then because I was drunk, it's immediately my fault.
Yeah, I think that's the messaging that until recently in at least this Western world has been like, what was she wearing? You
Correct.
were asking for it.
Why was she in the park?
Why would you go there with him in the first place?
Right.
I frankly don't remember going anywhere with this person, but I thought to myself, well, he can't have carried me over his shoulder like Santa Claus. Maybe he did. I don't think he was physically capable of that, but I felt I bore some responsibility, and I certainly wasn't willing to take the risk that they might not see it as me not having been a party to what happened.
Right.
I could not accept that level of shame. There was no version. There was no way I was going to put that on myself. So I thought better to just live with it and frankly bury it and never think about it again. I blamed it on the alcohol, really, at the time.
For sure, the alcohol, and also what happens with so many victims of assault, where immediately it's turned around to be my fault in our heads. So whether you speak to someone who's gone through incest or rape or been physically sexually assaulted, there's almost like this mechanism, which I don't know if it's just built into our human wiring of, I must have done something, or is it just from family and media and societal, where we just intake that there is a part of this that is your fault, and or parentheses, you're actually not going to be believed. Either you're not going to be believed, or there's going to be reason to find you culpable. And so why would anyone put themselves through that and not say anything? So for you to hold that for so many years, and some 30 or however many years later, for this boy who knew and saw what happened to say it to you, I can't even imagine what went on in your body when you heard that.
It was definitely a kind of, talk about a reframing. And I was able to feel like an adult. It's like I had to go through those 30, 40 years of sort of unwinding the various things that happened to me. And, at the hands of men over so many decades. I just had to sort of process all of it. And I made a very intentional choice to process it through EMDR at around age 50. And if I hadn't done that, I don't think it's actually that conversation that I just told you about is what spurred me on to do EMDR and really investigate the various things that I felt so bad about, sexually happening to me over the years.
Right. I'm going to put a peg in the EMDR because I want to talk about EMDR specifically. But I want to just begin to set the stage a little bit about what began to happen with your relationship with your own body in the mirror after the assault.
So perhaps unsurprisingly, I decided I would go whole hog restrict on alcohol. And, then I just started eating and eating and eating, and I think by 10th grade, I finally stopped growing taller. And so then I started to grow sideways,
you're a tall girl.
I'm tall, but, I even have a yearbook, my senior yearbook, where someone wrote in here, remember in 10th grade when we decided to say, pass the lasagna, we just ate like it was for sport, and I had been conditioned to eat that much. So I never felt, and to me, eating to the point of over full is when you stop.
Right. When you physically cannot anymore.
Yeah. And that was just my norm always, my whole life. The first time I had an overeating thing, I literally was probably 4, and I came home from a restaurant and I threw up a baked ziti into the sink. It was whole. It was like I didn't even chew it.
Right.
And I remember I literally inhaled it. I don't know how it got past my, down my throat, but my dad yelled at me not for throwing up in the sink. How could you be so stupid? Why did you throw up in the sink? Not, why did you eat so much? Oh my God, you ate too much. The flashing headlines were what you got in trouble for, and nobody was delving into the whys.
Yeah.
So why bother?
Or the precursor of how did a 4-year-old end up vomiting an entire baked ziti? A 4-year-old is a little tiny person. So already you were eating fast
and a lot
and abundantly. And so overeating became a tool.
Yeah.
And within how long was that followed by restricting?
So I think I got to a certain number on the scale, because there was definitely, I should preface this by saying that other people in my household were in Weight Watchers. And so I had this sense of scale and, amounts and stuff, but they seemed very foreign to me because they weren't put on me, but I was just more and more aware of them.
Right.
I got to the point, I would say by junior year, I had probably put on 20 pounds. And then I proceeded to restrict to the point by senior year, I had lost 30 pounds. And no one said anything but how amazing I looked. No one, and my mother would say, did you eat? By then I'm a senior. I eat at school. Oh no. And we come home late from play practice. Oh no, we ate at the diner. Well, I didn't, I was eating one tiny bowl of food of salad the whole day and smoking a million cigarettes, right?
So it went from the binging to now severe restriction.
Yeah.
So this was now in late high school.
This is now senior year of high school.
And still not drinking?
Still not drinking. No, not touching it.
And what are the accolades you're now receiving for the body?
Oh my God, you look amazing. You're skinny. You look so good. Not no one ever said, oh, you were so chunky or you were fat or whatever. But there's a picture that my siblings and I did for my parents for one of their anniversaries at that time. And I look like a basketball, my face looks like a basketball. It's just not a face that I recognize on myself, probably until I had children and was heavily pregnant,
Right. And what happened with your sister? Did she notice your weight gain? And was there any sort of camaraderie in it?
She was away at college. That's the other thing I'll say, is that once my siblings went to college, they were basically gone. And there were no cell phones in this era.
Right. Different era for sure. So you're now alone in the house and fast as the child, and parents are essentially kind of tired.
Yeah. And I'm making it very clear that I'm independent and I want nothing to do with them too.
I don't need you.
Even if I do, I'm seeking out parental advice from other people's parents, I had a friend whose older cousin went to Columbia and we would ask her things. Oh, so that brings me to, so senior year, I had a French teacher, not to be such a stereotype, but I had a creepy French teacher who, it got to the point of him putting things in my mailbox of the house where I lived, like a leather jacket. And we went on a trip to France as a class. Well, by some chance, I was seated next to him both there and back. Everyone else was seated in a different area, you know, and he was like, try on my jacket and whatever. I mean, and this is in front of everyone, you know, and then the jacket ends up in my mailbox. And I got so freaked out, not because I thought this guy is going to attack me or something. I thought my parents are going to find out. It was never about like, I'll take care of my business, but it was always about how do I block them from finding everything out? Right. So then everything just gets really tight. Really, for me, I just was like, white knuckling everything all the time. And so in that case, I turned to that older cousin of a friend who wrote a letter that sounded somewhat legal, you know, to my like 18-year-old eye. And he mailed a response that was like, I will absolutely, like, I am hereby stepping off, you know, because we said something along the lines of like, we will be pressing charges if you don't leave
to the French
me
teacher.
Alone to the French teacher. Yeah.
And
a married French teacher who had my friend and I over to his apartment when his wife was, you know, away, you know?
Right. The message of it's my fault again. So confusing.
It's so confusing. And I have a lot of empathy, even as I chastise myself for it. I was smart enough not to go alone. You know, I didn't go by myself. I brought a friend.
It's brilliant.
But, you know, who goes to that? Somebody who's not kind of within their right, judgment is still very teenagery brain.
Someone who doesn't have a prefrontal cortex completely evolved yet.
Yeah. And he was my teacher. Like he was an authority figure and a man. And I was taught to, you know, like so many of us, that's what the man says. That's what you're doing.
And the feeling of being made to feel special. I think that's what it's interesting. I often talk to people who are survivors of sexual assault, and their stories are so similar. There are so many interesting lines that almost mimic each other, even though the stories are different. And it seems to be that these people who are grooming children and young people for their own sexual perversion or whatever they have planned, they almost go to like sexual creeper groomer school. I don't know what it is, but what is it that makes every single groomer follow this way?
I wonder if it's just the power struggle, because what I do think to myself is that no one does that without it having been done to them, probably on some level.
Interesting.
And so it's just this terrible trickle-down effect. And thank God nothing more serious than that happened, but I was scared, you know?
Because it could have.
It could have, and I kind of, like you said, I liked the attention, but it was like, don't fly too close to the sun. And it was funny because we went on this trip. We were in Paris for part of it, and we met one of his former students at the top of the Eiffel Tower, and I swear to God, it was like looking in a mirror. It was like, and I said, oh, you're the girl from the last school.
So this was not his first rodeo.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
And so this is now towards the end of high school. You start college, and I'm assuming at some point you picked up some alcohol.
Oh, yes. She was a horse out of the gates.
What happened?
I just, you know, you can only hold it in for 18 years. And then was like a kid in the candy store, you know. It was illegal to drink, and it was everywhere and easy. And frankly, I think I told myself that I was doing better than a lot of the others because I wasn't doing a bunch of drugs and stuff. I just was like, I just smoke and drink. That's it. Smoke cigarettes and drink. But boy, much like my ability to eat somebody under the table, and particularly around men, I think it was a way, boys, let's say, it was a way for me to say, like, don't fuck with me a little bit, you know, because, oh, you think you can drink? But I still wanted their attention, right? It's this really twisted thing where like, oh yeah, I'll do a drinking contest with you and I'll win.
Right.
You know, or at least I'll go as hard as you. It was that terrible dichotomy of like, pay attention to me, but don't touch me, but pay attention to me.
Yeah.
I'll be loud. I'll be fun. I'll be, you know, wild, a little bit wild, you know, at a party or whatever. And then, you know, the very end of senior year, I was at a fraternity party. I mean, again, it's literally trope on trope on trope. No one had told me this trope. I wish I had known it beforehand. But there was a senior. He was like the captain of the soccer team. He was gorgeous. He was, Italian. It was just like, oh my God, dreamboat. So we were at this party. And then at some point he said, do you want to go upstairs to my room? So I went up. And then when I first went up, it was a room with a bunch of other men sitting around and then sort of like an inner room. We kissed. And then before I knew it, he was like, had all my clothes off and I was frozen, basically. I remembered these guys outside the door and I just thought, if I go out there, what if all of them then decide to do something, or I'll just have that terrible walk of shame. My clothes it was like in a loft bed. So then I had to, you're moving around. I wasn't able to just like pull things up on me. Yeah. He proceeded to have sex with me and I was like, I can't imagine a less, engaged partner, yeah. Let's say. And I
frozen
finally,
of sorts, I'm
frozen.
assuming.
I mean, just frozen. And then at some point he moved me in a certain position and I wasn't looking at him and I lost my shit and I was like, stop, get off of me. I think I might have just like, kind of like threw my arms back or something. Mm. And he stopped. And when I went out, it was like a scene in a movie. I guess there had been a fire drill or something. The entire fraternity house was empty. You could have heard a pin drop. It was the weirdest experience on top of weird experience. And I think on some level, maybe it was God like clearing the path for me so I didn't have to see anybody. And I got downstairs and my girlfriend that I had gone with was like circling the house, like pacing the house. Like, where is she? Where is she? And so I walked out the door and she was standing right there. She asked me what happened, and again, I was very confused about what was my part. What was any part of it actually not my part? Mm-hmm. So I said, again, this was like before caller ID or whatever. Right. I said, if we went back to my dorm room and we called the police anonymously and we described what had happened in greater detail. And the police officer, who was the man, that seemed to really make it hit for me. He said, what you're describing is rape.
And this was the 1980s?
90s.
90s. Okay.
Early 90s. And that was like, okay, I'm clear. Mm-hmm. But I sure as hell wasn't going to say anything to my parents. There was no way. Once again, I was in that position of like, I was doing something you wouldn't approve of, probably.
Right.
So I'm not going to tell you. And also as time went on, this was literally the last week of school. And I thought, well, at least I'll never have to see him again and whatever. Well, it turns out he came back for grad school. So I would see him all over, for years to come. And it really hardened me. It really just like broke me. I mean, I drank with more abandon. I stopped caring about what I looked like. I certainly wasn't looking to connect with other men, but at the same time would probably put myself in stupid situations as well,
What did it do with your relationship with your body? With you
fully disconnected, like from my head down. I mean, I wouldn't even, I'm a person, my high school yearbook, for every senior, they had a thing like never without or always whatever. Never without was one of the characters, and mine was lipstick. And so I started seeing a therapist and at this college where I was, and I became just like what I would consider like full hippie, just like no makeup, who cares about the clothes, whatever. Such that when I saw her a year or two later, because I went away for a year, I came back and I was sort of reborn somehow. Mm-hmm. I had felt my nervous system kind of like went back down to some level of calm. And she said, I literally like cannot recognize you. Wow. I mean, I just became like a ghost of myself. I wanted to disappear.
What was happening with your food and your body and your image and all of that at this point?
Oh, it was just shot to hell. I didn't want to look at myself in a mirror. I didn't have a scale, so I can't tell you if I went super up or super down or stayed the same, but I know that food and cigarettes and alcohol became numbing agents.
So you were overeating again?
Oh, yeah. I mean,
over drinking.
Absolutely.
And smoking.
Again, because let me restate that I don't want to state this as a fact, but I have not ever been known for moderation in anything. So then it's like, I already know how to do this. So then I just didn't have the will to starve myself in that moment, right? So then what's the opposite of that is just overdo everything else.
Did anyone ever ask you what was going on with you?
Yes. And luckily I had at school, unfortunately, for the state of affairs, my roommate had a similar experience the same weekend somewhere else.
Wow.
And then the two of us found a group on campus. And so there were a whole bunch of other female students that got together and talked. And that's what led me to getting into therapy. Thank God. But I was basically just flat. I would say my affect went from being the glue of the class, right? The lead in all the plays to just like flat affect, sort of disconnected. My studies, I didn't care about as much. All I wanted to do was get out of there.
Were there any sort of charges pressed? Did you ever speak to him? Was there anything done later?
No, because again, I always feared what my parents would say. So I didn't, and I knew my mother wouldn't be able to handle it. I say knew. I assumed she wouldn't be able to handle it. And my dad, I just thought, what might he actually do? Like, he's assimilated, but he's Italian. Like who knows what,
come out.
Who knows what he might do.
Unleash.
And so I just decided it wasn't worth the risk. But I remember being home during the summer and getting, 2 and 3 jobs. So I was just busy all the time, being like
numbing with work.
Yeah, numbing with work again. And I remember my dad, we were watching a commercial or something. I just was yelling at the TV screen or something. And he said, "Why are you so angry?" And I was just like, oh, got to reel it back because
it's coming out.
It's coming out. And I'm certainly not going to tell you. So then I think that's when I really just decided I just have to be away. I just have to go away. I got myself on a junior year abroad program, which was wonderful and really allowed me to just sort of exhale in what felt like a safe space. And frankly, just forget that whole thing, at least for a time being.
It's an interesting time because I've been watching a lot of the Diddy trials right now going on and all of the horror that, I mean, I'm screaming at the screen, honestly, and not to get into his story, but it's a tale as old as time of something happened, and yet we're trying to poke holes to find where the woman did something wrong. Was it the way she was dressed? Did she agree? Did she not agree? Was she drunk? Was she not drunk? Where can we turn this around to take blame off of the perpetrator, in this case, whoever it may be? And it's over and over and over again. And when you talk to young boys, especially, and they hear stories like this, even they are like, well, but she was drunk, but she was dressed in a certain way, but she made me think that that's what she wanted. And I'm just wondering if you are watching the trials right now, and if it wasn't Diddy, it would be someone else, because it's all the time, right? It's perpetual. What goes through your mind?
It's interesting. I had a conversation with my husband, who is very respectful of my, experiences and everything yesterday. There's no version of me being able to watch that trial. There's absolutely no version. I can get headlines. I can read about it. And I read about it. I saw the alerts coming in and was like getting the up to date, when they came in with the verdict. And You know, there's just, when do women ever get a break on this stuff?
Deflating.
Just because it's so deflating. I literally, and I was just, it's so disillusioning because the bravery it takes for these women to go forward, and then the way that they're either able, in this case, to poke holes. And again, I didn't study the case because it was just too much for me to stick my nose into. But my understanding is like, okay, so you can't prove, you know, X and Y RICO kind of thing. I mean, everybody knows this guy is garbage. But it just, I don't know. It's a frustration beyond words. And so I have to sort of look away because I will literally implode.
Absolutely. And I'm wondering, when did you choose to tell your husband about your past? Was it a decision that you made early on, or did it just come out organically?
I don't remember the exact moment per se, but I think that it was early and that I was open about it because it had become a big part of my story. By the time I met him, it was like, okay, like this is something that I know can be upsetting, not to be too graphic, but you know, there's a certain position that was the position that I was in that I just simply cannot
go
abide.
There. Right.
You know, and so it wasn't a source of shame with him. Right. So I knew he was a safe person to talk to that about. Thank God. But he would also hear me flip out about things like this trial we've just talked about. And so I think he got understandably very like, I'm just going to hold back. Like, I'm never going to comment on any of this stuff because, you know, and to his credit, he said to me just the other day, you know, I've learned a lot about the lived female experience from you, because when I'll say something along the lines of like, you simply can't understand what it's like to get into an elevator and have a strange man get in and it's just the two of you and your body. Like, if you're me, I don't know about all women, all my friends seem to say the same thing. You immediately think, okay, like, where are my keys? How do I elbow him? Like, what do I, you know, what is my mode of attack if this goes sideways? And this kind of thing happens to women all the time, whether it's, you know, construction men hooting at you. Or, I mean, I woke up on a train one time, a sleeper car with some stranger, you know, masturbating like at me and my friend. And another time we were grabbed in the middle of the street in the crotch, you know, like it's just, and I think because I'm a tall woman that I've always, you know, my former colleagues all used to joke, they called me, you know, the longshoreman, because I would be the one to pick up all the heavy boxes or whatever. And like, I can use my physicality, and I'm really glad that I had it. And it really makes me think about how difficult it must be as a petite woman in this world to operate, because I know I must be cutting my, you know, attacks or whatever on me by at least half, because who's going to mess with a tall person? Like, you're just a harder target, you know?
Right. I had a conversation with my husband. We were watching something on TV, and it was a woman giving an account of what had happened to her. And my husband said, you know, I used to hear stories of things happening to people. And I always used to think, okay, you know, she was 9 and, you know, she was babysitting and it happened. But that was like 40 years ago. Like, how come it's still so alive? And it wasn't until, you know, he and I went through stuff together, and we've grown together and we've learned together, that he's like, wow, this stuff really lives very actively on the cells. It's not something that you can say, oh, it was 5 years ago, it was 10 years ago, it was 20 years ago. It is part of our DNA. Right. And me, you know, me as a midwife, I take everything back to birth. So that innate fear that you talk about of being in an elevator and being like, is he going to be the one that's going to touch me there? Is he going to be the one? Am I not going to be believed? How am I going to get out of here? What are they going to say? You know, all of that. Are we passing that on epigenetically to the girls that are within us? What is happening at that level? And why does this in 2025 keep repeating itself like it was 1800 or 1700 or maybe 200 BC?
Right.
I don't know. But it wasn't until I had that conversation with my husband where someone could be with a loving partner now in a consensual sexual relationship and has zero control of where their body goes or where their mind goes or what happens. And the delicacy of a loving partner knowing or not knowing about the person's past, of being able to have the cue of, all right, I'm going to pull back now. I do or I don't know what's happening, but this is not the place where I feel comfortable going forward, is a very tenuous spot.
I have to say the concept of epigenetics, I'm sure it's fraught with some people have lots of thoughts about it. But for me, my basic understanding of it really helped me sort of forgive myself for being, as in my own words, I would say, is like aggro. Like I was, I came from like New York City out here, and I'm like, what are you looking at? Because that's just kind of the base setting out there. Yeah. And that's me, I think, after X number of, experiences in life. And to know that the hair trigger, emotional hair trigger, I've seen it in my siblings and in my dad. And when I hear about my dad's grandfather and I hear, it's like, that is a genetic trait as much as my eye color, I think. Yes. And so that gives me the permission to sort of say, like, not an excuse not to work on that, right? Where my husband is just like being his normal, kind self, and I'm taking out every rage moment on him because he happens to be a man, Right. Every rage moment that's accumulated in my memory because of other men on him. I mean, that's not fair. Right. To have that as a partial explanation really helps me to take more control of those feelings and not just like go into blind rage. And I don't know, it's just, I give a lot up to thinking that this is part of my journey, that maybe I had so many of these experiences because I ended up having 2 boys.
That was actually my next. You're literally reading my mind, because you have boys. And go ahead, because I have a question for you, which you might be answering.
Well, and the minute I found out, because I knew I would only have 2 children, the minute I found out my second child was a boy, I was like, I'm supposed to be, it just came into my brain. It was like a download from God or whatever. I felt like I heard a voice just say, you're supposed to teach them better. Like, not on your watch. Like, that's just what you're out here to do.
Oof.
And
the goosebumps, though.
Yeah. Ooh. And that was literally like from whatever week, what week did they give you the test and the doctor, And I was like, okay, that's what we're doing,
And so what's the message? What's the message for your boys?
The message for my boys from day one at all different levels of development has been bodily autonomy, others and their own, consent as an absolute. And, even now I just saw a billboard within the last few months in town that said, silence means no, no means no, silence means no, only yes means yes. Mm. And I never heard that. Yeah. And to be quite honest, I have excoriated myself over years of being like, I didn't say no fast enough with that guy. Like, I told him with all my body and everything, but like, did I say it fast enough?
Sooner?
And to know, and I don't, yes, I said it to them in a loving mode when they were younger, but you better believe the older they've gotten, they're now both teenagers. And I have said to them straight up, like, I'll kill you myself if I find out you do any of this nonsense. Like, I mean, they know I'm joking, but right. I am dead serious.
Yeah, joking, not joking.
Yeah, I take this incredibly seriously. And every male in my house, which is all there are,
right.
knows that I do not play on this issue. And that I value their, in my day, I never heard anyone talk about male consent either. I know it's harder for a female to maybe sexually assault a man, but it's certainly not from an adult to a child. And
Absolutely.
I don't know,
Yeah.
And they, just because there's a bodily response in their body or something doesn't mean that you still have to do it. You can stop at any time, all the things. So I really just made that my underpinning. I just want them to be, thank you. I just want them to be allies to women and to stop locker room talk when they hear it. You're the ones that need to get in. And, when you hear guys talking about this nonsense, tell them to shut up, or that's not cool, man, or whatever version of it.
Yeah. It's, we had something happen in our society in our community where a group of boys were sexually taken advantage of by someone at their school. And this was an adult in a position of power, adult female that was having sexual relations with minor boys. Mm-hmm. And the topic came up. We were sitting at a table. We were probably 40 people, 20 men, 20 women, including some young adults who were at the table. And the predominant feeling was, yeah, boys, you go, right? That, oh, I wish that was me. Or I'm so proud of my son. He got to have that experience. Good for him. And there was a group of women that were aligned with that. And then there were a few women that were like, what the hell is happening here? Like, what? The notion that a boy could be taken advantage of at the age of 15, 16, 17, 18 in high school, and the power differential was completely disregarded, because good for him that he was a boy having this experience. You go, my boy, you're the man, which blew me away.
That's the duality that permeates all of any assault too. It's like, oh, they were just having fun. All the guy ever has to say is like, she wanted it. Or, there's so many ways to just normalize it for men over women, more so than there are for women.
For sure. And the conversation that I had with one of my friends who was actually on the other team, who was like, it's fine. They're boys. They'll be fine. I said, what if it was a girl? What if it was your 17-year-old with a power differential of a man in his 40s who was in a position at that school? And she said, well, that would be awful. Right. And I said, well, why? She goes, well, because girls, like, something goes inside of them. And I was like, so?
That is some rationalization.
And she was like, well, but they actually have to like take it in, and then they're never the same. And I was like, wait, but the boy actually maybe has to put a part of their body in something.
That's a patriarchal purity argument that we're hearing, I think.
And it permeates through all cultures. It doesn't seem to be, I used to take it personally, right? As a Middle Eastern, in my religion, in my culture, I was like, oh, my people, we got some growing to do. But then I'm like talking to an Italian, I'm talking to a Black woman, I'm talking to an Asian woman. It seems to permeate, and it blows me away. Anyway, we're starting to get a little bit off track here. So back to you, Veronica. I could talk to you all day, through the long weekend, through next Tuesday morning, about all of this. I love your presence. I love your eloquence. I'm honored to hold space for this story. Tell me what EMDR is, how that helped you. What happened with your food and your body, and the binging and the dieting and the starvation and the holding it in and all of that? Where are you now?
Well, I am happy to say that I have hit a kind of equilibrium. I'm not sort of taking any day for granted. I know that could change on a dime. But I think if I hadn't done the EMDR work, which is a kind of therapy,
eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. What did that mean for you?
That meant being with a very skilled therapist who practiced that methodology, and her asking me to, list and then rank by difficulty of trauma, essentially, the various sexual assaults that I kind of count as the big ones. And one by one, we would move through them. She would ask about how it felt in my body when we talked about X, Y, and Z. And I would relate that to her. And then I was even able to do it virtually. And there was something that my eye would follow while she asked me to contemplate something, and then we would talk about that, and then we would repeat that, and so on and so on. It was really calming. It was a physical process as well. You feel a lot of things like kind of flushes in your body or tingling or things like that. And my understanding is that is basically kind of releasing those things in a way, kind of, let's say, a cellular way. Obviously, that is a very non-scientific explanation. But that processing of that allowed me to come back from, I started throwing up at 50, right? I had done all the binging and starving, mostly starving, over the years. And it just stopped working for the effect that I wanted on my body after a certain point. Yeah. And so then I turned to vomiting, and that was just something I had always said I was never going to do that. It's something I dislike doing deeply, deeply, deeply. And yet I was doing it. I was lying about it. Nobody else in my household knew. I mean, during COVID, everyone else is in the house, and still that's how, we're good. I'm a good liar, right?
You found a way.
Right. So I decided that vomiting was a bridge too far and that I needed to really delve into it. And I think what the eating disorder was clearly a coping mechanism, right? For how I was handling all of these things that weighed on me so heavily emotionally all these years.
And COVID brought them out for many of us,
yeah,
right?
Right. So what I had to do was really chip away at that experience. And it was not pleasant. Let's say it's like going to the gym and doing a really hard workout. But afterwards, I was very much relieved, both in body and mind. It's crazy. Like, it felt like it lifted out of my body in a lot of ways, and then I really was able to look more deeply at eating disorders and learning about different ways that can, like really facing it. I think I didn't put a name to it. I just thought, this is what women do to be skinny. This is just like, I was the frog in the boiling water, and I thought, this is what we're all doing. And it was what all of my peers were doing. And I just decided I needed to get off the roller coaster. And I put a lot of work over the last couple of years into, my spiritual side, and really asking for guidance and, listening to other people, following instruction, not acting as though I have to, or I know all the answers, making myself vulnerable enough to say, I don't know. This is where it got me, right? What I was doing didn't get me to a good spot. Mm-hmm. So clearly I'm no expert on this topic. So there's been a lot of healing. And as a result of that, there's been a lot of healing in my relation, in my marriage. There's been more and better communication than there's ever been in 20 some odd years. And I'm really lucky to be supported by a husband that's been willing to be by my side and watch me, allow me, support me as I go through all those twists and turns, because it was not pretty.
What would you say to that young girl who found herself in a field?
You have a journey, and it's going to take you some dark places, but in the end, it'll be okay. It actually made you stronger, I would say.
What would you say to that boy?
I'll tell you what I used to say is, I hope you have girls someday. But now that I'm in a more healed place, I would say, I know you were young and stupid too. And I can only hope that you recognize it for what it was sooner than I did, and made intelligent choices based on that, going from there.
Amen. You're incredible.
Thank you so much for
so
having me.
To spend this time with you. It's just so sacred, and you're such a light. And I know that you will continue to illuminate the path for people who come before you and after you, and just graced to have you here today. Thank you for being my guest.
Thank you so much, Atoosa.
Thanks for listening to the Mamatoosa podcast on the Industry Plant Podcast Network. Mamatoosa is hosted by me, Atoosa Benji, and produced by Josh Stretton Carlson. Our theme music is composed by Mary Lalazarian. If you enjoyed the podcast, please consider leaving us a review and subscribing. See you next Tuesday.